a Fed chairman that understood what he was doing, interest rates would be coming down too.
As we reported yesterday, the Trump team is already looking for Powell's replacement. But Trump seems to want the Fed chairman gone before his term officially ends next year. Can Trump fire the Federal Reserve chairman? Here's Powell's personal take on that.
I guess the other question is, to follow up on Victoria's question, do you believe the president has the power to fire or demote you, and has the Fed determined the legality of a president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions?
Not permitted under the law.
Not what?
Not permitted under the law.
Thank you.
Courtney. The Supreme Court is apparently looking into whether Trump can legally remove a Federal Reserve chairman or any of the other governors of the Federal Reserve, but it's obvious that Trump loathes Jerome Powell and believes, possibly correctly, that Powell is trying to tip the economic scales against Donald Trump to harm his second term in the presidency. I'm now joined by financial expert and founder of Finance Technologies, as well as the author of the book Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Death in 2021, 2022, and 2023, Mr. Ed Dowd, one of our audience favorites. A lot of people are asking, what I realize, even in talking to people in our circles, is a lot of people really don't understand how the Fed works, right? They don't understand who controls the Fed, how much power does Trump have? And I guess even the Supreme Court's going to weigh into this now. So from your personal thoughts, experience, what is the answer, Ed? Can Trump fire Jerome Powell? Can he force him out? What can happen here?
As it currently stands, I don't believe he can. But what he can do, and what I've heard in the background, is that they can name his replacement well ahead of time. And that replacement could then give forward guidance speeches and kind of neuter him, make him a lame duck Fed chair. The Federal Reserve is behind the eight ball. They should be lowering interest rates, especially with the tariffs. Liquidity around the globe is collapsing because tariffs are deflationary. So they should be working with President Trump and lowering interest rates. One, because we're in an economic slowdown, and two, tariffs are going to, unfortunately, in the short term, add to that. So he's right about Jerome Powell not lowering interest rates. He didn't need to call him a loser. Name calling's not helpful. He can't remove him, but what he can do is they can name their favorite next Fed chair, and that person could start, giving some jawboning behind the scenes or out in public, and that way they can kind of neuter him. That's kind of the best bet.
Oh, and there's already speculation about who that could potentially be, right? Who would replace Powell? The rumor mill, as is always the case in a Trump presidency, is in overdrive. Some rumors suggest iconic and contrarian investor Dr. Michael Burry. And again, I showed this on the show yesterday for people who might not immediately recognize the name. You might recognize the character from the movie a few years ago, The Big Short, in which Christian Bale played the role of Michael Burry. He's kind of that eccentric trader that shorted the mortgage crisis back in 2008. Is that a possibility, or is this just pure rumor?
I think this is classic Trump. Float something crazy and then find someone closer to the norm, is my guess. Look, Michael Burry is a smart individual, but he's not a Federal Reserve chairman quality type of person. He's a hedge fund manager, and we need someone that has a broad economic experience.
In more financial news, the U.S. is getting a new SEC chairman, Paul D. Atkins, as of today. He's officially in the role. He's known for his unconventional approach, notably for his loud and proud support for cryptocurrency. It seems that Trump is definitely hitching his wagon to the cryptocurrency craze. And as we noted, President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, who did set up a second reserve with Bitcoin for his country, is very pro cryptocurrency. Talked about that a little bit with Trump. They seem to have a good rapport when he visited last week. What do you make of this direction, of this choice for SEC?
Well, the former SEC was asleep at the switch. There's been a lot of fraud going on in corporate America, and he's asleep at the switch. So Any change is a good change. There probably needs to be some rules about cryptocurrency trading. It's the Wild West. But longer term, the love affair with crypto, I think, is going to take a backseat to gold. Gold is going through a very important transformation. The banking regulations, Basel III, have been changed. Where physical gold, not paper gold, physical gold will become Tier 1 capital again. You can collateralize it and loan it out, and that's going to transform the banking system. We took it off. We're going off the gold standard in '71. We're now reintroducing it as hard collateral again, which is a big deal, and probably explains a lot of the reason why gold is repricing. It's being sewn into the architecture of whatever new system is coming.
That's very interesting. I know you saw where Trump, I think it was Sunday, posted to his Truth Social, he who controls the gold. I'm paraphrasing here, but he who controls the gold makes the decisions, or basically the kingmaker. So that definitely also increased the surge on gold, right? But this is not that there had been a push. I remember particularly Steve Forbes. I would see him at every Freedom Fest every year, and he was there pushing for the U.S. to go back on the gold standard. That's not something that we will likely do, though, right?
No, but that would cause a deflationary collapse immediately. It has to be phased in. There needs to be a new monetary system. It's so complex, and unwinding the U.S. dollar reserve system would be a phenomenal undertaking. So this has to be done through stages, is my best guess.
But gold is still it's looking good for people, right? Because as you said, he's making it a hard collateral again.
The banking system's doing that. This has been agreed upon by the central banks and the global regulators of the banking world, Basel III. This is why there's such a mad dash to physical gold. I want people to understand paper gold is different. You won't get the same treatment. You can't go buy gold futures as JP Morgan and expect to loan against that. It has to be physical gold.
And on the tariffs, I do have to get an update on the tariffs while you're here, Ed Dowd. Caroline Leavitt reiterated again today from the podium that countries are coming to the table. We've talked to you, and you said that. You said that the phone would be ringing. You were right, it seems. The phone has been ringing. How is the president's tariff policy progressing? Is it progressing in a positive way for the American people? Because you and I both know when you open up, corporate media, or a lot of social media, there's these stories saying, oh, I just paid my first tariff. Everything is being passed on to the consumers. That was actually in one of my neighborhood. What's the Nextdoor app, which is the social media for the neighborhood. But now I do live in an area where there's a lot of Trump haters. So, there's that. But how is the tariff strategy progressing at this point in your opinion?
Well, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to. This is exactly what we thought would happen. It's a negotiation process. There's two types of tariffs. There's actual tariff rates, and then there's the non-tariff barriers. A lot of this, if you read the executive order, which no one really did, they discuss non-tariff barriers, which are a big problem and cause a lot of the trade imbalances. So these are things like corruption, bribery, dumping, sneaky supply chains, that kind of thing. So this needs to be addressed. And Trump is getting people to the table to do this. The 90-day moratorium obviously came quicker than we thought, and they seem to be focusing on China. Besson today said, obviously there needs to be de-escalation in China, and they need to come to the table. You got to remember, this is a dynamic process. The stock market's going to have its fits and tantrums. Overall, the stock market, we believe, is going to go down over the course of the next year because of a looming economic recession that was caused by the Biden administration's excessive government spending, fraudulent spending on illegal immigration. 10 to 20 million people just don't magically get into the country in 4 years without a lot of fraud, and that's what we're going to find out over time. And as we unwind that, because the economy was in such poor shape, the incremental spend was government spending. So this recession that's coming is, in my humble opinion, squarely lays at the feet of the Biden administration. The tariffs will be pointed to as causing it. It certainly doesn't help in the short term. It is deflationary. Tariffs are deflationary in the short term. It will squelch consumer demand, but longer term, this is an undertaking that we will look back on as pretty historic and a fundamental change in how global trade is done.
You know what? When Caroline Levitt today was talking about illegal immigration, of course, she was getting hit, by the corporate media there in the room. And then there were some friendly reporters asking about the actual immigration numbers. I thought of you because she said that we believe there are actually upwards of 20 million illegals that flooded the country in recent years. And it made me think about what you had said about it propping up this economy and the fraudulent economy, and that the Trump administration would be having to fix. And that's not what she was specifically asking about, but you could tell that was part of even the economic conversation, right? As you always point out on this show, Ed Dowd, thank you so much for joining us today with all the economic news we had happening in the moment. We appreciate you, Ed Dowd.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
And as you just heard from Ed, gold has become a better investment just this week alone. And while we would never tell you what to do with your money, we do want to let you know that if you go to lindellgold.com, you can get a free coin and you can get upwards of $20,000 in silver. You'll get information there about how you can take advantage of this gold boom under Donald Trump and make a wise investment in gold. That's MikeLindellGold.com, MikeLindellGold.com, or you can call 888-4GOLD-19. And when we're speaking about illegal immigration and the invasion of the border, we got some breaking news for you today on that front as well. The DOJ is taking more action against these Venezuelan immigrants. They're filing RICO charges. So that's conspiracy. RICO charges against 27 alleged Venezuelan gang members. That's those members of Tren de Aragua. As we've explained to you, they're not really just gang members. They're actually paramilitary troops for the Venezuelan cartel, which essentially controls the Venezuelan government. You've only seen that really here on LindellTV.com. We've led the coverage in this Trump administration's push against Venezuela because people didn't understand how much control the cartels had. And that's going to factor into more of the election fraud coverage that we're going to continue to bring you. We'll go more into that tomorrow.
Have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? Well, I recently saw a video he made and I was shocked. That guy's amazing and he's staying active well into his 80s. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, can work out longer, and even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by just making one change. He says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a very special video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/Lindell. It will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Lindell. You won't believe how simple it is.
Why is the president interested in doing a deal with Iran instead of doing everything he can, perhaps short of U.S. military intervention, to try and hasten the end of what many of his own supporters regard as an evil regime?
Well, the president has made it very clear that he will never allow Iran to have nuclear capabilities. That is a red line that he has drawn, and he will not allow that to happen. But you asked why President Trump wants to make a deal. I would remind you, he's the master of the art of the deal. He is America's deal maker in chief. He leads from a position of securing peace through strength. And I think time and time again already, in just 4 weeks, we have seen the president being able to negotiate successful deals with our partners, our adversaries all around this world.
There was Caroline Levitt moments ago in the White House briefing room answering the question as to why does President Trump want a peaceful solution to the Iran problem rather than just getting the U.S. involved in another military conflict? That seems to be the main question for the Washington establishment these days as the neocons push with all their might to try to get the U.S. involved in yet another war. We'll have more on that in a moment with retired Colonel Robert Maness. But the press secretary also made some other big announcements when it comes to conflicts across the globe, particularly the Ukraine-Russia conflict, saying that the president is growing quite frustrated with both sides of this conflict. This, as she also announced that Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, with whom she just met with in the Oval Office prior to her briefing with President Trump, is headed to Russia again this weekend to once again engage in talks with the Russian side of this conflict. As for traveling, she also made a big announcement for President Trump. He will make his first overseas trip in this second term earlier than anticipated, heading to Rome this weekend to pay his respects to Pope Francis. Now, we'll have more on that trip in my 8 p.m. show tonight right here on LindellTV.com. And speaking of the Iran question and President Trump's continued quest for peace, this is why the drumbeat to fire Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth continues pounding throughout the corporate press, the Democrat Party, and the deep state bureaucracy, according to our sources. That pounding is not just over petty personality issues or quote-unquote leaks. It's because the war party in D.C. is desperate, absolutely desperate, as you heard James Rosen of Newsmax note in the briefing room today, for their Iran war. Our next guest, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Rob Maness, said this. He said, quote, "The Marxist blob is trying to remove Secretary of Defense Hegseth's Tom Cotton." And that seems to align with the exclusive reporting we've done right here at The Absolute Truth. Here's our own Brandon Weicker from yesterday's show explaining the situation in which Hegseth finds himself.
Your reporting has sort of corroborated what I'm hearing behind the scenes. Something to consider as well. Tom Cotton, as you say, wanted the job from day one, and it looked like he was kind of positioning his allies throughout the Trump administration's national security team, Alex Wong being the most notable, but he has other allies throughout both the Pentagon as well as on the National Security Council. And in fact, this whole Signal Gate app mishap where the Signal Gate or the signal was leaked to Jeffrey Goldberg over at The Atlantic, it looks like the actual target from the beginning was Pete Hegseth.
And former White House National Security staffer Joshua Steinman, who served during Trump's first term in office, agrees with us here at Lindell TV. He recently tweeted his belief that the attacks on Hegseth are clearly an op. And that is true. It is obviously an op, but is it an op that's working? Well, we as Brandon Weicker and our next guest Rob Maness seem to believe, see the removal of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense only to be replaced by neocon Senator Tom Cotton. And joining us now is the host of the Rob Maness Show, a retired U.S. Air Force Colonel, Rob Maness. Colonel Maness, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. I suspect you're hearing a lot of what we're hearing, and that the deep state, the neocons, are gunning for Hegseth. But I've also been told by more than one official that they're gunning for anyone, honestly, right now, who are not just gung-ho about striking at Iran and are expressing any kind of reservation. Is that what you're hearing?
That's what I'm hearing. Absolutely. And you can see that by the facts. The facts are, Dan Caldwell, Carroll, Selznick, all of those were Pete Hegseth's picks. They're his close circle. And everything. And I understand that Secretary Hegseth, when he spoke to the media, I think in the last 24 hours, he said something to the effect that, they're leakers. They might have been close to me, but I have to get rid of them. And that's the position he's forced to take, Emerald. But what's really happening, more than likely, is he's going to be surrounded by neocon supporters and people that are more supportive of the Tom Cottons of the world. And that's unfortunate because Pete he's the embodiment of President Trump's approach, which is reestablish peace through strength and be a peacemaker instead of a war maker and only use force when it's absolutely necessary in the last resort.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the major reasons that the deep state worked so hard to get him out the first term, right? He was such a threat to this established foreign policy that is that of the administrative state, the steady state, whether you have a Democrat or a Republican in office, also to the military-industrial complex, of which you know well. The question is, this is an obvious op. We agree with Joshua Steinman. The question is it working? Here is what Hegseth had to say about his own future just yesterday. Listen.
What a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies and on hoaxes time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me.
Donald Trump and both Caroline Leavitt have reiterated the president's support for Pete Hegseth, but I'll be honest, Colonel Manus, I have seen cases in the past during the first term where Donald Trump said they were the best, they were amazing, they weren't going anywhere, and it was just a matter of a couple days before they were officially pushed out. So what do you think of the prospects of Secretary Hegseth remaining in this position for very much longer?
Well, fortunately, President Trump is a unique individual in presidential history. So I'm not sure that what we think we're seeing, like you, I agree with you. Usually what you see is they're gone in a week or so or a few days or so when you start hearing those statements. I'm not sure about that part. What I am sure about is that Tom Cotton actually came out last night. They made a statement of support for Hegseth, and they pushed back really hard on the NPR story that said they were looking. But I guarantee you somebody talked out of turn and leaked something out of the office that hires to the president's appointees, and they probably are looking. If they were smart, they would always be on the lookout, especially early in an administration, to see who they have lined up. Remember, the president said, look, we always have like a list of 12 people, so they might not even have to look, or some of those people may not be available, and they know that, and they're talking about it. Who knows? But the machinery is working in the background all the time. But I think the president is likely to stay with Pete. I just hope he gives his hiring team guidance and Pete guidance for replacements and for adding people in, because look, they have not filled all of the seats in the Department of Defense leadership positions, in the senior positions. And now they have the chief of staff, the deputy chief of staff, the deputy defense secretary's chief of staff, and the senior advisor all open in the front office there. So we still have an opportunity to make sure the right people are getting into place, and they need to be people that fully and adamantly support President Trump's peace through strength strategy, a mixture of people that might not have been in the Pentagon before, but some national security folks that are on the board with the president's strategy, but have been in the building before, because as many of us old people have said from the get-go on this, Pete's biggest challenge is not getting eaten up by the staff grinder and the staffing system grinders of the services and the joint staff and the Office of Secretary of Defense staff, and getting twisted up and twisted around some flagpole and not being able to get anything done. So far, he's been able to get some things done. We've seen a couple of really good policy letters out of his office. We've seen him do some really good, solid things on trips that he's made, like to the Panama Canal and out to the Philippines and to the Indo-Pacific region. Those are all really good, high-quality things, but there are leaks associated with all of those that need to be stopped. So I think he's on the right track. Even if you got to fire people close to himself, he's got to fire them, but he's got to insist on the right people coming in. That's what I'm concerned about, because the Tom Cottons of the world, whether they are speaking in support of Pete right now or not, they are trying to find the people that they can fill those positions with, those remaining positions, and there's no telling how many they've already got in. I don't have any insight into the personnel process, what's been filled but hasn't been approved yet and confirmed yet, and those kind of things. But Pete Hegseth does, and the President of the United States does, and his personnel hiring office does there at the White House. And they've got to get to work as a team and make sure they've got the right folks in there. Look, we've seen just today, the neocons are trying to get Tulsi Gabbard to have the intel say that Iran has nuclear weapons and we need to bomb them. That's what started all this press for Hegseth, is that he's part of that team that turned the bombing around, right. Apparently.
I had someone close to Gabbard tell me, look, we're well aware that if they take out Hegseth, that she is next. They will be emboldened to take out Tulsi Gabbard. That will be their next target. And you're right. So much of what we see them do is, while they can't maybe get rid of somebody, they can neuter them or, really hamper their effect, what they can effectively do by putting the wrong people around them. So this is not, even if he stays in place, look, you can't take your eye off the ball of who they put around him. And you're right. What I will tell you about PPO, and I literally talk to people every single day about this. I just talked to someone today who said, I was hired, I'm pretty sure, back in January, but I'm not officially in the building. It is working very slowly. And while at some agencies, some of the arts agencies, Department of Education, whatever, that might not be as big a deal when we're looking at a possible, brewing conflict in the Middle East and Hexath not having the people he needs around him. This is a pretty dire situation, and we need to keep our eye on it. And you explained it so well, Colonel Manus, and that's why we're so glad you could join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emerald. It's good to be with you.
Whether it's being a weekend warrior or spending time with your family, feeling your best is the key to doing the things you love. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Nirvanta. It's a natural solution designed to help you stay active and live well naturally. Nirvanta is a topical blend of all natural essential oils like frankincense, myrrh, and a proprietary gold standard plant stock extract. It's perfect for your hands, feet, knees, back, or anywhere else that needs a little extra care. Use Nirvanta proactively as part of your daily maintenance routine, and you're guaranteed you're going to feel the difference. Simply massage Nirvanta in for at least 60 seconds, 2 to 3 times a day to get the best results. And if you're not completely satisfied, you get your money back. No questions asked. There's simply no risk and no reason not to try Nirvanta today. Right now, you get 15% off with code Lindell exclusively at nirvantahealth.com. So stop reaching out for that medicine cabinet. Get Nirvanta instead and experience the difference. Go to nirvantahealth.com. Use code Lindell to get 15% off today. Nirvanta Health. Live well naturally.
Well, Caroline Leavitt's press briefing at the White House was packed today, where they hit all kinds of topics, mostly illegal immigration, because that's what, the corporate media cares for. Their hearts bleeding for illegal immigrants who have invaded our country. But not one of those reporters, a real reporter, our own Allison Steinberg, was in the room to give us a recap of the big moments of the briefing. Allison Steinberg, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, Emerald. Thank you for having me. It was a busy briefing today. Of course, immigration is sort of at the top of mind for everyone. As President Trump campaigned on, deportations are certainly one of the main focuses for him and his team, which they are doing an excellent job of, continuing to rid the nation of these aliens that should never be here in the first place. Of course, this is also important because the mainstream media, as we know, loves to spin that narrative and, run cover for these illegals who are violent terrorists and affiliated with gangs. They just write them off as Maryland men and good fathers and whatnot, but we know that couldn't be further from the truth. So good to see Caroline Leavitt correct the record there today, along with Tim Pool, who was in the briefing room asking about that specific story and calling out the fake news who continues to perpetuate it. But along with that, we also had Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announce that the Trump administration is officially putting an end to the Biden era illegal student loan bailout program. As we know, Biden largely campaigned on bailing out anyone who took out a student loan, told them they wouldn't have to repay it back, tried to fight it multiple times because, lo and behold, it's illegal and should never be allowed in the first place, and was never successful with that. So lo and behold, there has been a total pause on student loan payments since March of 2020. Many people have just sort of dismissed this and thought they have gotten off scot-free, but President Trump announced today that that is no longer the case. You must pay back your student loans. And if not, you are at risk of going into collections or having your wages garnished. So that is good news in restoring sanity back into America, making common sense common again. If you take out a loan, you got to pay it back. And hardworking taxpayers like you and I are not going to foot the bill for your irresponsible decisions.
I'm sure some of your socialist colleagues in that briefing room were crying at that announcement. You probably now know they're going to have to start paying back some of their loans for their Marxist indoctrination camp they went to. But this brings up a larger point. They also now have competition in that briefing room, right? So they don't just dominate it with their Marxist ways. We have 1 minute, but I want to highlight this story we made Politico today in an article noting that there is a quote unquote MAGA infiltration in the briefing room that's disrupting the White House briefing room. Kara Castronova, this features Kara Castronova, our other correspondent there at the front on this picture. But, Allison, we only get good questions from this so-called MAGA media. What were you going to ask today?
Well, they accuse the new media of not asking hard-hitting questions and, only giving softball questions to Caroline Leavitt, but that couldn't be further from the truth. If I got called on today, which I was so eager to get called on, unfortunately I wasn't, but I am dying to ask a question about the dang COVID shots. Is anyone going to be held accountable? Will arrests be made? I mean, as we know, millions of people suffered as a result of these untested mRNA poison shots. Many lost loved ones, died, are still suffering adverse reactions to this day, and there has been zero accountability. So I think we need to demand answers from the Trump administration and see what's happening there.
You know what? We're going to talk to one of those very people right after this segment. Allison, a young service member, is going to join us who had quote unquote voluntarily left the service because he wouldn't take the jab. So that's a perfect segue to that. Thank you so much, Allison Steinberg, for being one of those real reporters in the room. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
3 U.S. Army soldiers returned to active duty following President Trump's executive orders. They've also been promised back pay. These were soldiers who were kicked out for not receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. I believe they might be the first to be reinstated to active duty.
We're psyched. This is one of the promises made, promises kept from President Trump. We have followed through at the Defense Department. If you were a person of conscience, a person of faith, who believe that you shouldn't have to take an experimental vaccine in order to serve in our military, we will apologize to you. We will recognize the wrong that's been done. We will welcome you back with rank and back pay.
That was Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth speaking to Fox News a few weeks ago, celebrating the return of U.S. service members who were either relieved of their duties or quit the military because of the COVID-19 jab mandate. But our next guest, John Frankman, a former Army Green Beret and himself a conscientious objector of the Pentagon's vaccine mandate, wrote this recently at Breitbart, saying, quote, "Involuntarily separated service members will only receive back pay and time credited to their service if they agree to 4 additional years of service, or 2 for those who were eligible for retirement within 2 years' time of their separation. However, the back pay is subtracted from anything the service member made between when they were kicked out and when they returned to service." Frankman goes on to state that, quote, "Meanwhile, the much larger cohort of the voluntarily separated service members are not eligible for back pay and must serve 2 more years. To add more insult to injury, the Air Force requires airmen desiring to return to sign a document stating, quote, 'My decision to separate was made freely and without coercion.'" Very legalistic of them. Not only is this indirect contravention of both President Trump's and Secretary Hegseth express guidance, but it also treats these voluntarily separated quote unquote service members worse than transgender soldiers who are leaving as a result of the Trump administration policies. After Frankman and others rightly raised Cain about this, the DoD has responded by stating that, quote, "We are reviewing this policy," which is good news, and we're glad they are. Is this a bureaucratic snafu? The council just sort of, the council at DoD just kind of did this, or is this yet another example of the deep state striking back? I'm now joined by the author of that Breitbart op-ed piece, a former U.S. Army Green Beret and a medical rights activist, formerly who also ran for Congress, John Frankman. John, I was so disappointed when I saw you and others saying this isn't quite enough. And I think to people who are well-versed in the situation, it sounds great, right? Oh, they're going to offer back pay. Thank goodness these people are getting help. But it doesn't quite go far enough, what you explained in your op-ed, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And what I tried to critique was the back pay portion of what our service members going to get who were kicked out, and that's about 8,600 who were kicked out. You had tens of thousands of others, potentially 100K, who voluntarily separated. And the back pay isn't pure back pay. It comes with strings attached. They have to serve 4 years of service. Anything they made outside of the military afterwards is subtracted from that back pay. So if anything, it seems like an arbitrary reenlistment bonus that's offered just to the 8,600. Now, the 100,000 of which I would fall into that category, who quote unquote voluntarily separated. And I say that because being taken off of missions, being pressured by your hierarchy, your leaders to get the shot, being taken off the team, losing out on assignments, and then basically having to either get kicked out on your own or just wait until your exemption is denied. That's not a choice. That's not voluntarily. So there needs to be more for the back pay. And that's just one piece of it. There is still no acknowledgement that the order was unlawful. There's no help for the vaccine injured. And there is no accountability for the leaders. I think that a lot of the people, such as myself, who left, we'd be happier to see accountability and be more likely to return rather than an arbitrary reenlistment bonus.
And I can understand that. I can also understand why you wouldn't want to sign your name to something that you felt was false. Even if you voluntarily left, you were still forced out because you couldn't work or serve under those mandates. So to understand, absolutely, especially me. Everybody knows I don't. I tend to go with, that's why it's called the absolute truth, and it's gotten me in trouble in the past. But here's the issue. I agree with you. It sounds like, and I think this is probably their legal counsel suggesting they do this, right? The military counsel saying the Pentagon counsel saying you need to do this because you need to shield yourself from liability. You can't admit wrongdoing. If you do prosecute some of or hold accountable those Pentagon officials, the leadership that imposed these mandates, and I remember how Secretary Austin was wearing those double masks and it was just terrible. There's no accountability. Then you could re-enlist only to find yourself in the same situation down the road, correct?
That's right. Now, I know that Congress has tried to work through the Americans Act, which would make it required of the legislature to mandate any future vaccines. But I don't know. It is certainly a possibility that something like this could happen again, and that leadership is going to continue to wield power for their own political gain. And it's moral cowardice within leadership as well as just careerism trying to climb the ladder. So if you're not trying to punish that for what is a lawful order, what was an unlawful order, then you're going to have this again. And the people who put this order out and really enforced it and really crushed a lot of their subordinates, they're going to continue to rise in the rank. And the military is going to be morally weaker because of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What would you like to see? Has Secretary Hegseth or his team had a real conversation with those of you who are either forced out or voluntarily, quote unquote, voluntarily? We're going to use that term because that's how they're doing it, but we know it wasn't really voluntarily, but had to leave because of these mandates. Have they had a real good conversation with any of you?
He has not, to my knowledge, and I know a lot of the people who are in the circles who are doing this fight. There's a few members who did go up to the Pentagon to speak with some officials, but this is something that we've been talking about the last couple of years. Now, the 22 House Armed Service Committee, I wrote letters to every single one of them. The 24 Senate Armed Service Committee, I wrote letters to every single one of them. They should all be tracking the problems that are happening. We've been speaking about this very publicly. President Trump, he campaigned on this, that he's going to give back pay, he's going to reinstate. And it's absolutely frustrating for so many of us in this movement that none of us have been involved in making this legislation. Now, I appreciate Matt Gaetz when he was congressman, to his military his military advisor a lot on recommendations and things of that nature. But it would be nice to have this on both the legislative side, but especially right now with Pete Hegseth. And many of us would love to work for his administration, would love to work with him in the DOD. We'll be faithful. We stood up for the Constitution when our own jobs were being threatened. So we could definitely give great advice on how to fix this. And it would be just a win for everybody.
I have now interviewed so many of your colleagues who chose to not buckle under the weight of the jab mandates. And I will say, you all represent the best of the best, right? You're the kind of people that we want serving in the Pentagon, that we want in leadership positions. So I do hope that they genuinely and sincerely mean they're reviewing this policy, they're taking it seriously, and they're going to make this right. Because like some of the actions against the J6ers, and with Dr. Fauci being held accountable, this is one of those items that has to be made right, I believe, for us to really move forward as a strong constitutional republic. And I thank you for continuing to stand up, John Frankman, because you would like to serve and you'd like to have a position in the administration. And a lot of people turn down these interviews so that they don't have to be put in the position of telling the truth or criticizing an administration we all support and believe is doing good things and wants to do the right thing. But we have to highlight when there's problems so there can be a course correction. And I appreciate you being willing to do that, John Frankman.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Emerald. I really appreciate it.
And you can read his op-ed at Breitbart if you want to learn more, and you can visit him at johnfrankman.com to keep up with John. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the next generation of energy drinks, Rev 7. It has no sugar and no caffeine. Instead, Rev 7 uses Go BHB. Go BHB is one of the body's primary ketones, and it provides the most efficient and clean fuel that your body needs. It also helps you stay energized all day with no crashes. Not only that, it produces 3 times more brain energy than sugar, which helps boost your memory, focus, and mental sharpness. It also helps reduce stress and helps balance your mood. Rev 7 does all that while being the best tasting energy drink ever. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save 20% today. I'm so sure you're going to love Rev 7. For a limited time, you get our introductory 3-pack absolutely free. I drink Rev 7 every day and I absolutely love it, and so will you.
The thoughts and prayers of the entire White House remain with all of the Catholics around the world who are mourning the death of Pope Francis. Pope Francis touched millions of lives and dedicated his life to serving the Catholic Church. As a mark of respect for his memory, President Trump ordered flags be flown at half-staff, and he will be traveling to attend his funeral in Rome. The president will depart from Washington on Friday morning and return to the United States on Saturday evening following the funeral service.
Okay, so Trump is headed to Rome to pay his respects to Pope Francis, now the late Pope Francis, as Caroline Leavitt announced at the White House today. I just wish we could all be honest here. Pope Francis was a literal Marxist, okay? He was a heretical Marxist. With that, and I'm not Catholic, okay, so I will preface this by saying that I'm not Catholic, so some might say I might not have the right to speak here, but I do have a lot of Catholic friends. I do have a lot of respect for some of the Catholic priests that I know who do a lot of great work. I do think there should be some minimum requirements for the next pope, starting with he should be a heterosexual. He should not be a heretic. That should just be a given, right? He should not make pacts with communists. He should not elevate pedophile priests like Colonel Theodore McCarrick, now late as well. I mean, is that too much to ask? Also, we had some really other good suggestions from viewers, like this one from Warrior Mentor on X, saying he should not worship pagan idols in the Vatican, just at the very least. He also had another great suggestion saying that he should reinstate Archbishop Carlo Vigano, who was excommunicated by Pope Francis, and that he should also remove all restrictions from the Latin Mass. I know a lot of my friends who would very much appreciate that. And this is a really, really good one too from the George HQ, one of our favorite X accounts, saying he needs to be vetted by Laura Loomer. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great idea. One thing's for certain, though, the gay atheist leaders of the Rainbow Jihad are in mourning for Pope Francis. So that's really all you need to know about the Pope's infernal friends and allies. But who will replace him? That's the key question now. The most popular amongst the people is Cardinal Robert Sarah, but that, alas, probably puts him dead last. most likely in the conclave. And join us now to talk more about this is author at thestream.org, our friend John Smirek, who often talks and writes about religion, the Constitution, the culture war, all those other things a lot of people ignore. It's good to see you, John. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Emerald. Yeah, this is quite a time for Catholics. I've got a piece at stream.org about this. What do you say when your father dies? What about if he was a traitor? And I talked about, remember Robert Hanssen, the FBI agent who sold U.S. nuclear secrets to the Soviets and got at least 3 Russians working for the Americans killed? He died 2 years ago in a prison. I wonder what his sons did when he died. You know, his sons were patriotic Catholic Americans. When your father dies, you feel a natural grief. And to some degree, the Pope is our earthly father, but that doesn't mean we're obliged to lie about it. We should pray for his soul the way we should have prayed for Robert Hanson's soul, but do it in the same spirit. This is someone with a lot on his conscience. You said kind of casually Pope Francis is a heretic. Well, let's be specific. Pope Francis has taught that the death penalty is always wrong, everywhere wrong, has always been wrong. Presumably, logically, that means it was wrong when Noah passed along the covenant of Noah from God the Father in the Old Testament. It was wrong when Moses practiced the death penalty. It was wrong when the Christian church endorsed the death penalty for almost 2,000 years. The Vatican had the death penalty on its legal books till 1968. Presumably, it was wrong to execute the Nazi war criminals after the Nuremberg trials, even though Pope Pius XII said it was right and urged that they be executed quickly. Pope Francis has taught the death penalty is always wrong with no exceptions. He's also taught that deporting illegal immigrants is wrong, that it's like practicing the slave trade. However, the Vatican just 2 weeks ago allowed for sex change surgery. If people feel really sad and you're afraid they might commit suicide, they can have a sex change operation. What that does is it takes away the legal protection of Catholic doctors, nurses, and hospitals who might not want to perform such barbarous, mutilating experiments. Now the federal government can say, well, your own church says you're allowed to do it, so you have to do it. Pope Francis did this before. He supported the COVID vaccine, the experimental untested COVID vaccine that was developed using aborted babies, the kind of vaccine which Pope Benedict had condemned as intrinsically evil and said you should only take such a thing if you're in imminent danger of death, you may take it. Pope Francis said every Catholic should take the vaccine and told bishops to deny conscience exemptions to Catholics who didn't want to be forced by the state to take the vaccine. Pope Francis even minted a Vatican coin, a Vatican euro, showing a little kid getting vaccinated for COVID. Pope Francis has allowed for same-sex unions in Catholic churches. He made a deal with Communist China, selling out the underground church and giving the Communist Vichy collaborationist church the right to appoint bishops. And the man he sent to do that, to make that Molotov-Ribbentrop pact with the Chinese Communist Party, was Theodore McCarrick, a cardinal who had molested a child and who was known for sexually harassing handsome male seminarians. Many of the leading cardinals in the church in America today, such as Supich of Chicago and Tobin of Newark and McElroy of Washington, D.C., they were all proteges of McCarrick back when he was sexually molesting and harassing handsome male seminarians. They must have known all about it. It was common knowledge in church circles. They still associated with him. They still honored him. And he never faced trial for molesting that young man, James Grind, because he aged out. They said he was unable to stand trial. The legacy of Pope Francis.
He wasn't competent.
Right. The legacy of Pope Francis is the legacy of Diocletian. It's a persecutor of the church. Pope Francis has persecuted the church from within. My private theory is I think he joined the seminary long ago on the orders of his local Communist Party cell. We know from Bella Dowd, who testified before the U.S. Congress, that the Communist Party was infiltrating Catholic seminaries in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We know from a Romanian Secret Service, secret police defector that liberation theology was created by the KGB, who sent Marxist Jesuits to Latin America to try to turn the church into a communist front group. Pope Francis constantly echoed and reiterated and supported the themes of liberation theology. He even accepted a communist crucifix of Jesus on a hammer and sickle. He accepted that from a liberation theologian in South America. He venerated a pagan idol at the Vatican. He publicly embraced Emma Bonino, an unrepentant abortionist, on multiple occasions. He invited population control fanatics like Jeffrey Sachs to speak at the Vatican, and then invited Chelsea Clinton to speak at the Vatican, but condemned Donald Trump as not Christian for trying to control the U.S. border, even though the Vatican has fewer than 200 citizens, none of whom can vote. If Pope Francis were to follow his own logic, he should let all the gypsies in Rome have Vatican citizenship and let them vote on how to dispose of the Vatican's wealth. You'd see those paintings streaming out of the Vatican museums within a day.
That's quite a long list.
I'm not even finished. I've just decided to hold back, you know.
We could probably take it. We could definitely easily take up a whole show pointing out, a whole hour long, easily pointing out the heretical actions of this Pope. But let's move forward. What does this portend for the future of the church? I mean, people have told me, and look, we have to cover the church because it is a political power player. It is also a driver of the culture, right? Whether they're, as you noted, they just allowed for transgender surgeries, right? I have been told that he stacked the cardinals in such a way that there will only be an equally progressive successor. Is that true? I mean, what is it going to be Parolin?
He tried to do that. However, people have said he may not have succeeded because he picked people from various third world countries whom he thought would be progressive. They might not all be as progressive. What I would like to see, you know, in the past, secular powers have influenced the election of popes. Pope Otto the Great, the Holy Roman Emperor, marched into Rome in, I think, the 10th century. The Vatican, at that point, the popes were being appointed by the local aristocrats, who were basically like mafia crime families. And in fact, a prostitute, her name was Mazovia, was the person who picked the popes. And historians call this period of the Vatican, of church history, the pornocracy, meaning the rule by prostitute. Otto III marched in, deposed the corrupt pope who the prostitute had chosen, and forced him to elect an honest pope. Secular rulers have had a positive influence on the church, sometimes correcting its errors. I would like to see the Trump administration send some signals to the cardinals. You should not elect another Marxist anti-American pope. If you do, there will be consequences. Those consequences could include the Department of Justice doing a RICO investigation of the U.S. Catholic bishops for human trafficking because they've been helping, Catholic charities have been helping cartels to smuggle immigrants across the border. They could investigate the USCCB for covering up sex abuse. They've never been faced with charges for moving pedophiles around and not telling parents about it. They spent, I think, $5 billion in settlements for sex abuse cases in 20 years, but they never faced any criminal charges. Also, the Vatican has been immune to lawsuits for sex abuse because of a legal loophole. The Trump administration could close that loophole so that victims of sex abuse could sue the Vatican for the policies the Vatican had in place that made the sex abuse crisis possible. I think that ought to happen. Certainly, it's a threat which the Trump administration ought to quietly convey to various cardinals. If you elect another pope who's going to make alliances with communist China against the U.S., which is what Francis did, If you're going to continue to try to smuggle immigrants into our country and make money from it, the church collected $3 billion in 15 years from the US government, mostly for bringing immigrants into the country. If you're going to do all those things, well, you're going to find that the American government is not very friendly to the Vatican. And I think most American Catholics would be fine with the US government, with the Trump administration, pushing back against a Marxist Pope who is hostile to the United States the way Pope Francis was. I would love to see Caesar influence the papacy for the good.
I agree with you. All the American Catholics I know would certainly endorse that kind of action from the Trump administration. And look, they're taking on the Venezuelan cartel by announcing today that a RICO investigation into 27 Tren de Aragua members. Why not give the same threat to the Vatican cartel? I think that is a fantastic idea. And for our audience, if you want to keep up with John's work, you could also get his book. We did this great X Live a few months ago on your book, No Second Amendment, No First. You can go out and get that where books are available now. John Smirek, it's good to see you. Let's follow this. No one can put it quite the way you can. And I love your suggestions. I hope they make their way to the Trump administration. I think they will. It's good to see you, John.
You too. Thanks.